Hey there folks, this video is going to be a really big FF10 deep dive lore video. This one is a close look at the history of Spira based off of the Final Fantasy X Ultimania Omega Guide's official FF10 timeline, translated and arranged by GameFAQs user PMOG. I will leave a link in the description of the video so you can look at PMOG's translated timeline on your own. Otherwise, we'll be looking at each bullet point in greater detail, Iceberg video style. And just one more point before we begin. This is not an AI voice narration. This is actually my real voice, and it takes a lot of work to record these, so hopefully you appreciate that. Without further ado, let us begin. Approximately 3,000 years ago, the development of the magic civilization. This era in Spira's history is vaguely defined as the time before the rise of Machina, shrouded in mystery and speculation. What little we do know suggests a world ruled by stark divisions, an elite class wielding powerful magic, while everyone else was left behind. Clues to this forgotten past can be found in the lesser-known Final Fantasy X 2.5 Ayan no Dasho novella. Yes, the infamous story where Tidus meets a rather explosive fate, courtesy of a blitzball-disguised bomb. Setting aside the bizarre twists of the novella Final Fantasy X 2.5, it does offer valuable glimpses into Spira's ancient past, through the recollection of soldiers from both the Bevelle and Zanarkand armies. We see a world still dominated by magic-wielding elites, this time in the form of summoners. Even more intriguing is the presence of a long-forgotten religion, one that worshipped a pantheon of gods, a stark contrast to the singular godless faith that defines Spira in the present day as a religion of suffering and atonement. The novella reveals that summoning once existed in multiple forms, some of which have been lost to present-day Spira. It raises an intriguing question. What did the magical society of ancient Spira truly look like? If we could peer deeper into this forgotten era, we might uncover a world where summoners wielded far greater power and influence than we ever imagined. The invention of Machina. Even the most devout followers of Yevon acknowledge that Machina first emerged on Spira roughly 3,000 years ago. According to Yevonite teachings, this technological advancement led to moral decay, making Spirans complacent and corrupt. The creators of Machina were the Proto-Bhed, known then as Beetles, a group both essential yet ostracized. Despite relying on the Beetles for the machines that gave them the aptly named Machina cities an edge in the war, the rest of Spira viewed the Beetles with disdain, a hypocritical prejudice against the very people who fueled their growing power. The use and spread of Machina. More importantly, the invention of Machina reshaped Spiran society as a whole, narrowing the gap between magic users and ordinary people. With electricity and mechanization, even those without magical talent gained access to a higher quality of life, challenging the long-standing dominance of the magical elite. The rise of Machina parallel advances in the real world's industrial revolution, where machinery lifted the average person from a life of servitude and manual labor. Well, okay, maybe not quite like that, but it did lift people out of serfdom. Meanwhile, the old elites, once unrivaled in their power, found their dominance threatened as a new class emerged, those who embraced the economic and military potential of technology. This growing divide ultimately led to a clash of civilizations, culminating in the war between the Machina-driven city-state of Bevelle and the summoner-ruled Zanarkand. The appearance of Machina, which surpasses magic. The magical elite still held considerable power, with the summoner Yevon ruling as the head of Zanarkand, and elite summoners appearing in Final Fantasy X 2.5 flashbacks, commanding forces on both sides of the war. However, despite their immense abilities, magic alone couldn't keep up with the sheer numbers of ordinary soldiers armed with Machina weapons. Those who embraced technology gained a decisive military edge, proving that firepower and innovation could rival and even surpass the mystical might of summoners. For many Final Fantasy X players, this might seem contradictory. After all, we see Zanarkand as a Machina-powered metropolis, yet it's described as a summoner-led kingdom that depended on summoners in battle. The key to understanding this lies in Spira's overall disharmony between magic and technology. While Zanarkand heavily relied on magic, that didn't mean it abandoned Machina entirely. Final Fantasy X-2 clarifies this divide, portraying Bevelle as a Machina-dominant superpower with military superiority, while Zanarkand leaned more on summoners like Len rather than advanced weaponry. The Machina civilizations reach their peak. In present-day Spira, sin is believed to be divine punishment for the excesses of the Machina cities. The Temple of Yevon teaches that only through repentance, worship, and rejecting Machina can the sins of the past be atoned for. Yet, the truth is far more ironic. Spira's great civilizations weren't undone by Machina, but by magic. Both Bevelle and Zanarkand fell at their peak, cut down by the newly created sin. Bevelle, despite its technological superiority, was forced to bury its Machina deep underground in hidden temples and corridors, while Zanarkand lived on only as a dream sustained by the surviving followers of Yevon, who sacrificed themselves to become faith. And in this instance, when I say followers of Yevon, I mean followers of Yevon from Zanarkand, not the Temple of Yevon. We then fast forward to 1,000 years ago on the timeline. Zanarkand, mainly using summoning as a method of combat, fights with Machina-armed Bevelle. The translation further expands that both are Machina civilizations, but Bevelle has the edge. This also echoes the earlier point about Len fighting on the front lines, but Final Fantasy X-2 expands her story, giving us a closer look at her romance with Shuyan. More importantly, it reveals that Bevelle had its own answer to sin, Vegnagun, a colossal Machina weapon designed for war. However, its inability to distinguish friend from foe led to its abandonment, sealed away in the Farplane. Ironically, this same indiscriminate destruction would later define sin, whether by accident or design. It's easy to imagine a world where Yevon, in creating sin, may have taken inspiration, consciously or not, from Bevelle's failed superweapon. Regardless, the summoner forces proved to be inferior to the ever-expanding power of Machina. Summoner Yevon, ruler of Zanarkand, turns the surviving citizens of Zanarkand into faith. When we finally reach the peak of Mount Gagazet and witness the vast wall of faith, countless souls sealed into the stone, we finally get a reliable glimpse into Zanarkand's true past. Up until now, everything we've known about the city has been through the distorted lens of Dream Zanarkand, as seen through Tidus and Jekt. While the dream preserves Zanarkand's golden age, a deeper and more unsettling question lingers. Why did so many people willingly sacrifice their lives to sustain Yevon's vision? This idea is expanded on further in Final Fantasy X 2.5, where Zanarkand's population is depicted as almost cult-like in their unwavering devotion to Yevon and Yunalesca, referred to only by their titles, the Mage of Zanarkand and the Summoner Princess. From this, we begin to see a society shaped by absolute loyalty and blind faith, not unlike real-world cults such as Scientology. Using the power of these faith, Yevon summons Dream Zanarkand, the memory of Zanarkand. He himself becomes Yevon and creates the first sin. Yevon's ability to command absolute loyalty from his surviving followers speaks to the deep psychological and ideological grip he had over the people of Zanarkand. However, there's reason to believe that this influence may have not been purely ideological. It might have been magical in nature. While this is never explicitly confirmed, Final Fantasy X 2.5 repeatedly suggests that powerful magic users possess the ability to manipulate the minds of the masses, raising the possibility that Yevon's control ran even deeper than mere devotion. This also presents a very different form of summoning compared to the aeons of the Summoner's Pilgrimage. Instead of channeling a faith sacrifice to call forth an aeon, the faith of Mount Gagazet sustain an unending dream, a perfect recreation of Zanarkand at its peak. Rather than a temporary manifestation of power, this is a summoning of an entire city, preserved indefinitely through the will of countless souls. It's worth noting that Dream Zanarkand doesn't seem to reflect the true nature of Zanarkand as a summoner-led kingdom. Tidus arrives in present-day Spira with no knowledge of summoners or guardians, suggesting that these concepts never existed in the dream version of his home. Unlike historical Zanarkand, where figures like Len fought on the front lines as summoners, Dream Zanarkand appears completely devoid of magic. This raises an intriguing possibility. Was Yevon's vision of a perfect Zanarkand one without summoning at all? Looking deeper, this actually makes sense when considering that the people of Dream Zanarkand seem to have some level of agency. If they possessed the ability to become faith and summon for themselves, it could threaten the stability of the dream, and possibly even Sin itself. If another figure like Yevon emerged in the dream, capable of creating a similar creature, it might unravel the entire cycle that Yevon worked so hard to maintain. Speaking of Sin, the second half of Yevon's summoning is its creation. Yevon forges Sin with himself at its core, using gravity magic to pull together dense concentrations of fireflies, forming a kind of programmable armor. The purpose of this monstrous being is singular, to protect Dream Zanarkand at all costs. To that end, Sin annihilates any civilization that grows too large or too advanced, and mercilessly destroys anyone who ventures too close to the hidden city. Dream Zanarkand, meanwhile, exists suspended along a mysterious levitating water stream, perhaps better understood as a dense concentration of fireflies, or even an extension of the far plane itself. This stream carries the Dream City far out into the ocean, where it floats in secret while Sin endlessly patrols its perimeter. If you look closely, you can even spot this levitating stream in the game's opening scene, as Sin destroys Dream Zanarkand, a subtle detail that, on subsequent playthroughs, rewards sharp-eyed players with a satisfying moment of realization. Starting with the abandoned city of Zanarkand and Bevelle, Sin destroys the Machina civilizations. This idea is reinforced throughout the game, as every ruin the party encounters on their pilgrimage is accompanied by Wakka's unwavering disdain for the lost Machina civilizations. Yet, despite Sin's relentless destruction, Bevelle managed to survive and reforge itself under the tenets of the growing Yevon faith. According to Yevonite teachings, Sin's attacks are divine punishment for the decadence of the fallen cities. But for Tidus, the truth is far more devastating. His beloved Zanarkand was never spared. The real city was wiped out long ago, and the only version that remains is nothing more than a dream. The citizens of Bevelle at that time think that what Yevon summoned from the Zanarkand faith is Sin, and that Sin going around destroying everything is a sign of Yevon's violent anger. The Yevonites were close to the truth, but not entirely correct. Realizing that Zanarkand was no match for Bevelle's military might, Yevon chose to preserve it, not physically, but as an unending dream sustained by the faith. Sin, however, was summoned through a very different method. Unlike an Aeon, it wasn't born from a faith's sacrifice, but instead created with Yevon himself as its core. This raises an interesting question. Does summoning truly apply in Sin's case? While the term is debatable, I think the ambiguity itself is worth exploring. After all, summoning is rooted in magic. Where we draw the line between summoning magic and other forms of magic is all that really matters for this argument. And in the end, Sin isn't so different from Aeons in one key way. It follows the will of its master. Yunalesca, a summoner from Zanarkand, turns her husband Zaon into a faith and destroys Sin with the final summoning. She remains on Spira as an unsent. Yunalesca, the daughter of Yevon and sole surviving summoner of Zanarkand, becomes the first summoner to defeat Sin. Zaon, her guardian and husband, becomes the first final summon. Or does he? Final Fantasy X 2.5 reveals that the final summoning is distinct from the traditional summoning we see throughout the pilgrimage, where faith remains sealed in stone. Instead of calling upon a dormant faith, this summoning relies on a deeply personal bond, one rooted in love. Not necessarily romantic love, but the profound connection between a summoner and their guardian. Through this bond, the summoner transforms their guardian into a powerful Aeon. This form of summoning was once more common among elite summoners and their guardians in ancient Spira. In Bevelle, at least, guardians would even take on the names of the gods from the old pantheon, becoming immensely powerful Aeons, uniquely tied to their summoner. Unlike the faith we encounter in the present day, these guardians never become eternal statues, suggesting a different, perhaps more personal form of sacrifice. So while it is true that Zaon became the first final Aeon to defeat Sin, the term final summoning itself only holds meaning in a world where this technique is used specifically for that purpose. In reality, the method behind it, the transformation of a guardian into a powerful Aeon, was far more common in the past. Back in the so-called good old days, this was simply another form of summoning, not the desperate last resort it would become later. Unlike traditional summoning, where a faith sacrifices themselves to become the core of an Aeon, the final summoning reverses this dynamic. The summoner is the one who dies in the process. In this way, the burden of sacrifice shifts from the faith to the summoner, marking a grim departure from earlier summoning practices. As the first to perform this rite, Yunalesca becomes an unsent and lingers in the ruins of Zanarkand, awaiting those who complete their pilgrimage, so she can pass on the knowledge of the final summoning. Yunalesca and Zeon are the only ones to escape during the fall of Zanarkand. She uses the final summoning with the knowledge that it will not fundamentally solve anything. Yunalesca's true motives are never fully explained. While Machina suggests that she played a role in shaping the Yevon faith, the Ultimania Omega states that she only learned of its existence from the pilgrims who ventured to the ruins of Zanarkand. Upon discovering them, she found their beliefs aligned with her own, ideals that notably seem to reflect the cult-like values of Yevon Zanarkand as described in Final Fantasy X 2.5. This raises an interesting possibility. Perhaps Yevon originally intended Sin as a means of control, a last-ditch effort to ensure Zanarkand's victory over Bevelle. But in the end, Sin proved too powerful even for its creator. Unable to maintain control, Yevon's mind shattered, leaving only Yunalesca to carry the fanatical vision of cult Zanarkand in his place. The survivors start work on the Reconstruction of Spira, focusing on Bevelle. At this point, the Temple of Yevon Faith hasn't fully taken hold, and with Sin temporarily gone, the surviving Spirans believe their troubles are finally over. Bevelle, now free from the looming threat, is rebuilt into the grand city that still stands in present-day Spira. Given its scale and architectural complexity, it's hard to imagine Bevelle as anything but a Machina-powered city. After all, such an ambitious reconstruction would have almost certainly required the use of construction Machina, despite the faith's later condemnation of such technology. The second Sin appears publicly with Yunalesca's final Aeon, Zeon, as its core. It destroys the remaining Machina civilizations. Just kidding, Spirans. Turns out you're totally f***ed. Sin comes back, and this time Yevon feeds on Yunalesca's final Aeon in order to keep Sin powered as its core. We later learn that in order to destroy Sin permanently, Yuna has to sacrifice all of her Aeons, while also defeating the final Aeon at core of Sin, and lastly, destroying Yevon within Sin, who maintains the spell that regenerates Sin. Because Sin attacks Machina civilizations, there is a widening trend of people abandoning Machina. The true rejection of Machina begins with the return of Sin. While most of Spira turns away from technology in fear of provoking another attack, the Bhed, the very inventors of Machina, continue their work, developing new machines while excavating and restoring old ones. Already viewed with suspicion by the rest of Spira, the Bhed become even further ostracized as the New World Order solidifies around the belief that forsaking Machina is the only way to prevent Sin's wrath. However, their influence remains somewhat muted at this stage. Not everyone is entirely convinced of the temple's efficacy, and the living memory of Yevon and Yunalesca, particularly among those who fought against them in the war with Bevelle, may still be too fresh for blind devotion to take hold. The temple's dominance is coming, but for now it's merely planting the seeds of what will one day become absolute control. The Yevon Temple adds the concept that sin is a punishment for people's sins into its doctrine. At the same time, it spreads the story that the calm will arrive with the use of the final summoning. The Yevon Temple's doctrine takes shape around three key ideas: the promise of safety through rejecting Machina, the burden of guilt placed on those who waged the Machina wars, and the hope of a temporary calm, a fleeting peace like the one that followed Lady Yunalesca's first defeat of Sin. These tenets provide a way for Yevon's followers to rationalize Sin's relentless destruction while also praying for atonement. Life without Machina will undoubtedly be harder, but they are told it's the price for safety. By repenting and forsaking technology, they can supposedly avoid Sin's wrath. At the same time, they gain a convenient scapegoat. Those who still use Machina, or even those who used it in the distant past, can be blamed for their continued suffering. And finally, the idea that Sin can be defeated, even if only for a short time, gives the people something to cling to, however fleeting that hope may be. With these three things, Yevon's grip on Spira has begun. With the Temple of Yevon now established, we can flash forward to around 800 years ago. Mihen founds the Crimson Blades, later known as the Crusaders. He heads to Bevelle in order to defend the true intentions for its establishment to the Yevon temples. By this point, Yevon has grown considerably in power over the last 200 years since its formation. Naturally, the rise of the Crimson Blades, founded by Lord Mihen to protect Spirans from sin, becomes a cause for concern. As the militia group rapidly expands, the maesters brand them as rebels, wary of any group that would challenge their authority. To counter these accusations, Lord Mihen takes a bold step. He travels to Bevelle to stand before the maesters themselves. His willingness to submit to their scrutiny earns their trust, and rather than being disbanded, the Crimson Blades are absorbed into Yevon's structure. Rebranded as the Crusaders, they become an officially sanctioned militia, operating under both Lord Mihen and the authority of Yevon itself. The path Mihen traveled to Bevelle would later be immortalized as the Mihen High Road, a name that carries a dual meaning. On one hand, it references the road's high altitude, winding above the Spiran landscape. On the other hand, it serves as a tongue-in-cheek nod to Mihen himself, who quite literally took the high road by confronting the maesters directly, dispelling any whispers of rebellion through diplomacy rather than conflict. Mihen founds the Crusaders' monster arena in the Calmlands. There isn't a whole lot to this one. The monster arena was founded by Lord Mihen in order for the Crusaders to train against captured fiends. Later in the game, you can also battle captured fiends at the monster arena. Jumping ahead to 700 years ago, the Yevon priest Omega is executed by the temples for the sin of high treason. By the time of the priest Omega's era, the faith of Yevon was widespread, yet its promises were beginning to waver. Even after 300 years, no summoner had succeeded in defeating sin a second time since Yunalesca's final summoning. Doubt began to fester among the people, and few questioned Yevon's teachings more openly than Omega. Branded a heretic for his defiance against the temples, Omega was executed, but death was not the end for him. As an unsent, his spirit lingered in the depths of the Omega ruins, where over time, his resentment and power grew. Eventually, he transformed into one of Spira's most fearsome fiends, Omega Weapon. Approximately 500 years ago, Mihen High Road, the old road, is destroyed by sin and a new road is built. Our favorite historian Michin provides insight into the distinction between the new road and the old road as we travel.
Would you like to hear about the High Road? We are currently traveling a part of the Mihen High Road called the New Road. Naturally, that suggests that there is or was an old road. The road that runs below this new road is the original Mihen High Road. Hence, the road that Lord Mihen walked is not this road, but the old road. The new road was built to replace the old road destroyed by sin 500 years ago. But sometimes, standing on the old road and reminiscing about the past can be a pleasurable pastime.
From the safety of the new path, we can peer over a precarious ravine, catching glimpses of the treacherous old route below, a silent reminder of the dangers once faced by travelers before Mihen's legacy reshaped the landscape. And listening to Machina can also be a pleasurable pastime. Also, if you've made it this far and haven't subscribed already, what are you waiting for? I don't have a whole lot of Final Fantasy videos out right now, but the more interest I see in these videos, the more videos like this I'll make in the future. Otherwise, I have a lot of Phantasy Star Online lore videos as well, and if you have an interest in that series, please check those out as well. Anyway, back to the timeline. Approximately 400 years ago, Summoner Gandof, not to be confused with Gandalf, defeats Sin with his final summoning and becomes the first High Summoner in history. After 600 long years, someone finally did it. Summoner Gandof succeeded in defeating Sin, becoming the first High Summoner, and, in doing so, reaffirming the Temple's promises. His triumph not only solidified faith in Yevon, but also established summoners as true protectors of Spira. Gandalf's legacy set a new precedent. Summoners were no longer just pilgrims on a sacred journey, but guardians of the people, committed to deeds that benefited all of Spira. One of Gandalf's most famous exploits took place during his pilgrimage through the Thunder Plains, which are sometimes called the Gandof Thunder Plains in his honor. There, he confronted the menace of the Cactuars, rounding them up and sealing them in stone, bringing long-sought relief to the Jose continent. This gives credence to Yevon's teachings, and doubts about the temple subside. It took 600 years for Yevon's teachings to finally bear fruit, and in that time, uprisings like Omega's rebellion had shaken the faith of many. So, when Summoner Gandof successfully called forth his final Aeon and vanquished Sin, it marked a turning point in Yevon's history. The aftermath of Gandalf's battle was etched into the very landscape of Spira. The Scar of the Calm Lands, a vast chasm torn into the earth, stood as a testament of the clash. His victory also ushered in Gandalf's calm, a brief but much-needed respite where Sin vanished from Spira, giving the people a fleeting taste of peace. The third Sin appears publicly, with Gandalf's final Aeon as its core. A core tenet of Yevon's teachings remains unchanged. Sin would not truly disappear until the people had prayed and repented enough for the past sins of the hedonistic Machina civilizations. And so, despite Gandalf's heroic sacrifice and the temporary peace of Gandalf's calm, Sin inevitably returned, reinforcing the cycle of despair and devotion that kept Yevon's grip on Spira unshaken. Approximately 230 years ago, Summoner Ohalland, a former Blitzball player, defeats Sin with his final summoning and becomes a High Summoner. Ohalland, a legendary Blitzball champion for the Kilika Beasts and Wakka's personal hero, becomes the third summoner to bring about a calm. His victory over Sin earned him the title of High Summoner, making him the second in history to achieve this monumental feat. As had become the pattern, Ohalland's calm came to an end with the inevitable return of Sin, this time with Ohalland's own final Aeon at its core, twisted into the very force he once fought to defeat. Jumping ahead to 100 years ago, Summoner Yocun, a former Crusader, defeats Sin with her final summoning and becomes a High Summoner. Yocun became the first female High Summoner, excluding Yunalesca, who never held the title, as she performed the final summoning before the Temple of Yevon was ever founded. Before taking up the mantle of Summoner, Yocun was a dedicated Crusader, solidifying her legacy as a warrior who fought for the people of Spira. In Zanarkand's Dome, we briefly glimpse a memory of her clad in Crusader garb, as a fellow Crusader turned Guardian solemnly offers to become her final Aeon. She would have accepted this pledge just as her predecessors had, using her Guardian in the final summoning to bring about Yocun's calm. But as always, this cycle endured. Her final Aeon would one day be twisted into the next incarnation of Sin. "50 years ago, and we finally get into a realm of familiar faces, starting with Wakka becomes Grand Maester of Yevon. And of course, Grand Maester Wakka remains a looming presence even in the events prior to Final Fantasy X, serving as both the unsent foil and the head of the Temple of Yevon. But seriously, 50 years as a Final Fantasy X's equivalent of the Pope? That's a long time to be running the show. 35 years ago, Auron is born. You know, I feel like Final Fantasy has a habit of getting the crusty old warrior archetype totally wrong. Auron, the grizzled, battle-worn warrior monk, was what, 35? Come on. And Steiner from FF9, the clunky over-the-hill knight, a whopping 33. Seriously, devs, you're way off the mark. You're aiming for Clint Eastwood, and you're barely hitting Bruce Willis on a bad day. In any case, Final Fantasy X's resident badass, and many a fan's favorite character, Auron, is born. He rises through the ranks to become a highly celebrated warrior monk of Yevon, only to throw it all away when he refuses an arranged marriage with a Yevon priestess. Cast aside for his defiance, Auron finds a new purpose, becoming the steadfast guardian of Brasa, and later Yuna, ensuring that his legacy would be carved into Spira's history, even in death. 28 years ago, Seymour Guado is born to Jiskel Guado and a human woman. Yeah, that's kind of wild when you think about it. Seymour always feels more like Yuna's generational counterpart, but at 28, he's closer in age to Auron than he is to Yuna. It also reframes his dynamic with Auron. Instead of an older mentor versus young villain setup, it's more like two veterans of Spira's harsh reality. One who chose duty and honor, Auron, and one who embraced corruption and power, Seymour. That adds some extra depth to their different philosophies. Seymour, instead of bridging the gap between humans and Guado, ended up as an outcast in both societies. Too Guado for humans, too human for the Guado. That kind of rejection and isolation at a young age probably did a number on his psyche. Yeah, that backfired pretty hard. What's tragic about all this is that Jiskel genuinely wanted peace between the races, but by forcing the issue, he created someone who would later embrace the darkest aspects of Yevon's teachings. Seymour didn't just want unity, he wanted to end all suffering, in the most twisted way possible. If Jiskel had played it differently, do you think Seymour would have turned out the same, or could he have been someone completely different? 25 years later, Jiskel becomes the leader of the Guado and spreads Yevon's teachings to the tribe. It all makes sense from a political standpoint. Aligning with Yevon meant stability, security, and a place in the dominant religious order of Spira. But you have to wonder how much of Jiskel's decision was influenced by how the Guado treated Seymour. Maybe he saw Yevon as a way to integrate the Guado more fully into Spiran society, making them less isolated and less likely to repeat the kind of rejection his son experienced. Of course, it also set the stage for Seymour's later power grab. As Jiskel's son and a half-human, half-Guado, Seymour was uniquely positioned to rise through the ranks of both societies, but instead of using that position to unite people, he twisted it into his own nihilistic ambitions. Do you think Yevon ever truly accepted the Guado, or were they seen as outsiders despite their alliance? Kimahri Ronso is born. Our favorite Ronso runt is born at the Ronso community on Mount Gagazet. The Ronso celebrate strength above all, and as such, the diminutive Kimahri, who still seems pretty large to scale compared to humans, isn't really seen as being an ideal warrior for the tribe. 23 years ago, Wakka is born. Growing up on the island of Besaid, Wakka was forced into a caregiver role far too soon, after losing both of his parents while he and his younger brother Chapu were still children. The tight-knit Besaid community helped them get by, but the hardships of orphanhood left a lasting mark, reinforcing Wakka's unwavering devotion to Yevon, a faith that, as we see throughout the game, manifests in stubborn, sometimes outright bigoted beliefs. Yet, beneath that rigid doctrine lies a warm-hearted, well-meaning man. His natural instinct to protect extends beyond his brother, as he becomes a steadfast guardian figure for both Yuna and Tidus on their journey. The Besaid Aurochs lose in the first round of the Blitzball tournament at Luca. This starts a 23-year losing streak. In the game, it's explicitly stated that the Besaid Aurochs have never won a single match. Given their staggering 23-year losing streak, it stands to reason that the team itself may have only been around for that long. With Besaid's lack of proper facilities and its remote location making travel to the mainland difficult, the Aurochs likely had far fewer opportunities to practice in a real Blitzball stadium or compete against seasoned teams. Yet, despite their abysmal record, the villagers' supportive nature shines through in the team's endearingly humble motto, "To do our best." 22 years ago, Lulu is born. The party's black mage, Lulu, is also born in Besaid, just a year after Wakka, and like him, loses her parents to sin in an attack. Growing up alongside Wakka and his younger brother Chapu, she develops a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor that sets her apart. While Wakka takes on the role of a warm and protective older brother, Lulu embodies a more stern, maternal presence, offering measured, pragmatic advice, but revealing a softer, more caring side when it truly matters. Approximately 20 years ago. Internal discord intensifies within the Guado tribe. Jiskel prevents disunity in the Guado by banishing his wife and child to Bhed. Back in Guado Salam, Jiskel Guado faces growing unrest among his people. The Guado, wary of change, are not exactly thrilled about the presence of a half-human hybrid in their ranks. Despite Jiskel's wisdom and dedication as their leader, the pressure to maintain unity forces him into a painful decision, exiling his wife and young son Seymour. It's a move that speaks less to his personal beliefs and more to the delicate balancing act of leadership in a society resistant to change. Jiskel's loyal retainer Trammell discreetly arranges for Seymour and his mother to be sent away to the remote island city of Bhed, where a Yevonite temple still exists to this present day. Isolated from the Guado, Seymour begins training as a summoner, with his mother serving as his guardian. Though physically removed from Guado Salam, the weight of his exile and the expectations placed upon him would shape the course of his destiny. 18 years ago, Wakka begins playing blitzball. At just 5 years old, Wakka falls in love with blitzball, kicking off a lifelong obsession with the sport. Despite his dedication, however, his passion does little to change the fate of the Besaid Aurochs, who remained locked in their infamous losing streak. For Wakka, blitzball becomes less about victory and more about tradition, at least until the arrival of Tidus, who brings a spark of change to both the team and Wakka's outlook. Aware of her impending death, Seymour's mother travels to the Zanarkand ruins alongside her son and becomes the faith for Seymour's final Aeon, Anima. Seymour refuses to accept his mother's power and returns to Bhed. The distinction between a final Aeon and a regular Aeon is a little bit murky when it comes to Anima. Normally, the final summoning requires a deep personal bond, resulting in a guardian sacrificing themselves to become the summoner's ultimate weapon against sin. But with Seymour's mother, things didn't quite line up. She willingly offers herself, yet Seymour never actually completes the final summoning. Anima exists, but there's no evidence that it was ever used to fight sin. Nor do we see Seymour suffering the fate of previous summoners who successfully summoned a final Aeon. This raises some interesting questions. If Anima was meant to be a final Aeon, why does Seymour get to use it like a regular Aeon without dying himself? Could it be that the ritual was started but never completed? Or maybe since the nature of summoning is so tied to belief and perception, the memories we see later in the game, and which grant exposition on this topic, are shaped by Seymour's and his own mother's perspectives rather than the objective truth. It's one of those lingering mysteries in FF10's lore that doesn't have a clear-cut answer. Nevertheless, Seymour does not use the Aeon of his mother to battle sin, instead returning to Bhed, where he continues to develop his corrupt views, spurred on by his mother's sacrifice. Seymour's mother knows of the mechanics of the final summoning through Jiskel. It is thought that the Guado possess their own records, which tell of sealed histories in fragments. Furthermore, it appears that Jiskel is aware of Seymour and his mother going to the Zanarkand ruins and privately supports it. Given that the Guado were separate from the Temple of Yevon for most of their history, it stands to reason that they would have their own records and oral traditions about the past. This makes it all the more frustrating that Guado Salam isn't explored in greater detail. The city's grand architecture and Jiskel's manor suggest a wealth of historical knowledge that the players never get access to. If we had the opportunity to read through books or documents in the palace, we could have gained a deeper understanding of the Guado's unique perspective on history, perhaps offering details that contrast with the dominant Yevonite versions of events. Regardless, it also stands to reason that Jiskel would approve of his wife and son making a noble sacrifice for the betterment of Spira, as it would likely be a way in which to further unify his people during the divisive period while he tried to bring them back into Yevon's flock. A priest from Bevelle named Brasa elopes with the younger sister of Sid of the Bhed tribe. Forsaking the high echelons of the temple's hierarchy, where marriages are typically arranged with the Yevonite elite, Brasa quietly rebels against tradition by falling in love with and marrying an Bhed woman from a prominent family. His wife is none other than the sister of Cid, the future leader of the Bhed. While Brasa isn't outright excommunicated, he faces intense scrutiny and quiet ostracization for choosing love over the rigid expectations of Yevon's inner circle. His decision not only distances him from the temple's favor, but also foreshadows the unconventional path he will eventually take as a summoner. Brasa becomes close to Cid's sister while visiting the Bhed home to make contact with the Bhed. After their marriage, Braska's career prospects are completely derailed for wedding a Yevon opposer. Likewise, Cid severs all ties with his sister. The Bhed remain the only major faction in present-day Spira that openly rejects the temple's teachings, making Braska's union with Cid's unnamed sister a scandal on both sides. Braska's reputation with Yevon plummets, while his wife's ties to the Bhed do little to shield her from scrutiny. Instead of bridging their worlds, their marriage leaves them both as outcasts. Brasa, a fallen priest in the eyes of Yevon, and his wife, an Bhed who married into the enemy's faith. 17 years ago, Tidus is born to Jecht and his wife. Final Fantasy X really has a thing for leaving parents unnamed, huh? Even Tidus's mother, who we actually see and interact with in flashbacks, remains just Mom. Despite her lack of identity, her role in Tidus's backstory is significant. Tidus is born in Dream Zanarkand 17 years before the events of the game, growing up under the shadow of his distant, overbearing father, Jecht, while his mother's attention remains fixated on her husband rather than her son. Since we know Tidus is based on the memory of Shuyin from FF10-2, and that Dream Zanarkand itself is a construct maintained by the faith on Mount Gagazet, the question arises, how exactly does time function there? Is it a perfect recreation of the Zanarkand that once was, replaying the same events on an endless loop? Or does it evolve and degrade in some way over the centuries, with the faith's memories fading and being filled in with new details? This could explain why Tidus isn't simply named Shuyin, and instead exists as his own person, shaped by a world that may not be a flawless copy, but a dream slowly shifting over time. Tidus's experience on Mount Gagazet raises even more questions about how Dream Zanarkand functions. When he briefly returns, he isn't reliving a single moment, but seemingly jumping around his own past, observing himself at different stages in life. This suggests that Dream Zanarkand isn't a linear recreation of the past, but something more fluid, possibly shaped by the perceptions of the faith maintaining it. Of course, since he's interacting with the faith directly, rather than physically returning, it's also possible that what he sees isn't Dream Zanarkand itself, but rather fragments of its memory, highlighting just how little we truly understand about its mechanics. Yuna is born to Brasa and Cid's sister. Yevonite heretic Brasa and the so-called traitorous Bhed, Cid's sister, also have a child, Yuna. Her heterochromatic eyes, one green and one blue, serve as a subtle marker of her mixed heritage, as Bhed are known for their striking green, spiral-patterned irises. And speaking of those distinctive eyes, FF10 2.5 drops an interesting bit of lore. Turns out, the Bhed's eye color and scrambled speech aren't natural traits, but the result of an ancient spell cast on the Bhed people. The magic elite of old really had it out for them, branding them as outcasts for their use of Machina, even while those same elites eagerly turned that very technology against one another in a war. Anyway, 13 years ago, while heading to the Bhed home by ship, Yuna's mother is killed by Sin. Brasa makes a firm decision to become a summoner. With nowhere to turn in Yevonite society, Brasa and his wife set their sights on Beacon Island, hoping the Bhed would take them in. But tragedy strikes before they ever reach their destination. Sin attacks their ship, claiming Yuna's mother in the chaos. Heartbroken and stripped of the life he had tried to build, Brasa makes a solemn vow. He will become a summoner, not just to seek purpose in his grief, but to ensure his daughter never suffers the same fate. If the only way to protect Yuna is to bring about the calm, then he will see it done. 10 years ago, Wakka joins the Besaid Aurochs. At just 13, after 8 years of dedicated blitzball practice, Wakka finally joins the Besaid Aurochs. Unfortunately, his addition does little to break their infamous losing streak. Another decade would pass before they'd taste victory. That is, assuming you played well enough during that crucial tournament match. No pressure. While out training for blitzball at sea, Jack touches the 5th sin and is transported to Spira. Out at sea, Jack hones his skills and dreams Zanarkand, unaware that his life is about to change forever. When sin drifts too close, Jack, ever the curious type, makes the mistake of touching it. That single moment is all it takes. As Ifrit explains, when Jack touches Sin, he became real. Sin's overwhelming gravity magic tears him from the dream and pulls him into the modern Spira, making him the first person to ever cross the boundary between the two worlds. The warrior monk Auron becomes the guardian of summoner Brasa. Brasa also makes Jack, who is imprisoned in Bevelle, his newest guardian, and the three leave on a pilgrimage to obtain the final summoning. The most unlikely band of misfits sets out on a summoner's pilgrimage. Brasa, the disgraced priest turned summoner, Auron, the steadfast warrior monk with unshakable principles, and Jack, the loud-mouthed drunkard who ended up in a Bevelle jail for raving about being a star player of the Zanarkand apes. A shame we never got a prequel chronicling their journey. Square Enix, if a full game is too much to ask, how about a short scenario letting us step into their boots, just for a little while? Come on, you know we'd eat that up. Think about it, you could do a whole bunch of short games like this. Take our money. Anywho. Summoner Brasa defeats Sin using Jack as the Faith for his final summoning, and becomes a high summoner. We all know how this three-way bromance story ends. Brasa completes his pilgrimage, defeating Sin by using Jack as the Faith for his final summoning. In doing so, both Brasa and Jack make the ultimate sacrifice. Brasa is immortalized as the 5th High Summoner, his victory ushering in another calm, while Jack's fate is far more tragic, bound to the endless cycle of Sin's rebirth. Auron challenges Yunalesca by himself and is mortally wounded. Blinded by grief and fury, Auron storms Zanarkand's dome, determined to put an end to Yunalesca and the brutal cycle of sacrifice. But alone, he is no match for the ancient unsent summoner. Overwhelmed, he suffers a fatal wound, his body left broken and dying at the steps of Zanarkand's ruins. Yet even death cannot stop him. His sheer will keeps him tethered to Spira, setting the stage for his return years later. Kimahri's horn is broken by Auron, and he leaves Gagazet, unable to bear the shame. Humiliated and cast out, Kimahri chooses exile over living in the shadow of his defeat, with his broken horn serving as a constant reminder for his perceived weakness. He wanders the world beyond Mount Gagazet, seeking purpose in a land where strength is everything. His journey will eventually lead him to the most important vow of his life, one that will shape the course of Spira's future. And yeah, even though Kimahri is still a beast of a warrior by human standards, among the Ronzo he's treated as weak, especially by Auron and Yankee, who constantly belittle him. It really drives home how the Ronzo's culture is built around sheer physical prowess, and if you don't measure up, you're an outcast. A dying Auron entrusts Yuna to Kimahri on the outskirts of Bevelle and then passes away. He becomes an unsent. This moment not only ties Kimahri into Yuna's story, but also gives deeper meaning to his silent loyalty. Auron, barely clinging to life, sees in the young Ronzo a protector strong enough to carry out his final duty. With no grand speeches or elaborate rituals, just a few desperate words, Kimahri's path is forever changed. He accepts the responsibility without question, setting him on a journey that will define his existence. One where he will stand as Yuna's silent guardian, just as Auron had sworn to be. Meanwhile, Auron fades from this world as he becomes unsent. What's interesting is how Kimahri turns the rejection of his society into loyalty of another kind. Instead of staying and proving himself to his tribe, he leaves and dedicates his life to protecting Yuna. It's a classic case of finding your own strength outside of the expectations forced on you. Do you think Kimahri would have eventually earned the respect of his tribe had he stayed, or was leaving the only way for him to truly grow? With the arrival of the calm, the Guado's internal discord subsides. Following that trend, Seymour's exile is revoked. He returns to Guado Salam and assists his father as a priest. Braska's calm not only brings a temporary peace to Spira, but also eases the tensions within the Guado. With Sin temporarily gone, the teachings of Yevon seem more credible than ever, offering the Guado a sense of stability. Jiskel's vision for unity gains traction, and the once skeptical traditionalists begin to embrace Yevon's doctrine. The shift paves the way for Seymour's return from Baj, no longer an outcast, but a symbol of his father's ambitions. At Jiskel's urging, Seymour steps into the role of a Yevonite priest in Guado Salam, setting the stage for his eventual rise to power. Kimahri brings Yuna to Besaid village. Kimahri honors his promise to Auron, becoming Yuna's steadfast guardian, carrying the orphaned girl away from Bevelle's political and religious machinations. He journeys across Spira to the remote island of Besaid. There, Yuna finds a new family among Wakka, Lulu, and Chapu, growing up under their care and forming bonds that would later shape her fateful journey as a summoner. Auron rides Jecht's Sin to dream Zanarkand and begins to watch over Tidus. Now an unsent spirit, Auron has fulfilled his promise to Braska, but one vow remains, the one he made to Jecht. Determined to watch over Jecht's son, Auron seizes the rare opportunity his undead state affords him. Using the new Sin, now fueled by Jecht's final Aeon as a passageway, he journeys to dream Zanarkand. There, he spends the next 10 years as a silent guardian and reluctant mentor to young Tidus, preparing him for the journey that lies ahead. "9 years ago. Jiskel, leader of the Guado, and Kelk, leader of the Ronzo, become maesters of Yevon, as part of Micah's subrace's appeasement policy. With the Temple of Yevon at the height of its influence, its next move is to fully integrate itself into the cultures of Spira's various races. To cement this, Jiskel Guado, both a Yevonite priest and leader of the Guado, is elevated to the rank of maester. Alongside him, Kelk Ronzo, honorable chieftain of the Ronzo, is also made a maester. While Kelk remains somewhat enigmatic, his polished speech and refined mannerisms hint at an education under human Yevonites, positioning him as the ideal bridge between the temple and the fiercely independent Ronzo tribe. Tidus's mother dies from a broken heart over Jecht's death. The loss of Jecht and the deep mourning of Tidus's mother mark a major turning point in Tidus's life. Having always seen his father as a brash, overbearing alcoholic, Tidus's resentment hardens into full-blown hatred. With his mother consumed by grief and barely acknowledging him, Tidus is left to stew in his anger, further cementing his view of Jecht as an absent, selfish figure who abandoned them both. The sixth sin appears publicly, with Braska's final Aeon, Jecht, as its core. This part's a little bit confusing and sort of muddles the previous point in the timeline, where Auron rides Jecht's Sin into Dream Zanarkand. If Auron was able to hitch a ride to Dream Zanarkand on Jecht's Sin, that suggests Sin doesn't actually vanish entirely. Instead, it may retreat to the distant ocean near Dream Zanarkand, focusing on its role as a guardian to the dream, while recovering from the damage of the battle. This would explain the discrepancy between Sin's destruction from Braska's final Aeon, with Auron riding Sin to Dream Zanarkand, and the re-emergence of Sin. Either that, or it's just a plot hole that got overlooked. Nevertheless, 9 years ago, prior to the events of the game, Sin returns to Spira. This marks a particularly short calm period. 3 years ago, when Keenock becomes a maester of Yevon. When Keenock's rise to the rank of Maester of Yevon is a pivotal moment in the organization's recent history. As a former warrior monk, Keenock's deep ties to the Yevon faith and his battle-hardened background allow him to command both the warrior monks and the Crusaders with an iron fist. His position grants him immense power, placing him in direct opposition to the ideals of his once close friend Auron, who in his time away from Spira grows to reject Yevon. Keenock's promotion solidifies his influence within the temple, but it also sets the stage for future tensions. Seymour assumes the post of High Priest of Macalania Temple at Micah's nomination. He secretly travels to the Zanarkand ruins to acquire Anima. He then transports its statue to Bhed and seals it up. Seymour's ascent within the Temple of Yevon marks a significant shift in his character. As he rises to the rank of High Priest, his ambitions begin to take a darker turn. Returning to the Zanarkand ruins, he finally claims the Aeon from his mother's faith, an act he had once rejected, symbolizing his complete embrace of his power and Yevon's teachings. But Seymour's actions don't stop there. He also transports the faith statue of Anima to the Temple of Bhed, sealing it away, possibly to prevent others from using it or to harness its power for his own ends. This decision solidifies his growing control over both the spiritual and political aspects of Spira, marking him as a figure to be reckoned with within the temple. Seymour revisits Bhed many times. It is around this time that he makes a firm decision to carry out his plans. The attack on Bhed by Sin, which devastates the surrounding area while leaving the temple intact, plays a crucial role in the fate of the Anima faith. With the rest of the region destroyed, the temple becomes an isolated sanctuary, effectively removing Bhed from the pilgrimage route and rendering it inaccessible. This makes it an ideal hiding place for the Anima faith, keeping it out of the hands of potential summoners while preserving its power. We also know that Bhed's destruction must have been within the last 10 years, because Braska's statue is in the temple's antechamber. As for Yojimbo, the mysterious Aeon, often tied to a sense of mercenary loyalty, it's been theorized that he is indeed the original faith of the Bhed temple. This idea fits neatly into the narrative of Bhed's destruction and the temple's disconnection from the pilgrimage, positioning Yojimbo as the Aeon of the stolen faith. This connection raises intriguing questions about the nature of the faith in the world of Spira, especially considering the potential for their wills to be manipulated or bound to places and forces beyond their control. That would also kind of connect all of the dots in a neat way, but anyway, moving on. Seymour also resolves at this time that he wants to be the bringer of death and destruction to Spira. Seymour's desire to become Sin reveals the depth of his nihilistic worldview. His conviction to bring about death and destruction stems from a profound disillusionment with Spira. In his eyes, the endless cycle of sin, the suffering, and the eventual calm are just temporary fixes, masking the rot at the core of society. By seeking to become Sin, Seymour aims not only to acquire immense power, but also to assume control over the cycle itself. He believes that by embodying Sin, he can cleanse the world, erasing the people who have failed to live up to the ideals he once revered. This radical path of destruction shows Seymour's growing disconnect from the ideals of Yevon, and his willingness to betray those around him for the sake of his own twisted vision of justice. It's a path that leads him away from any possible redemption, with only the need for absolute control and chaos guiding his actions. 2 years ago, Yuna begins training as an apprentice summoner. Yuna's admiration for her father Brasa is a driving force in her life, and as such behind her decision to apprentice as a summoner. Growing up hearing the stories of his heroism and sacrifice, she feels a deep connection to his legacy. She sees becoming a high summoner as not just a way to honor her father, but as a way to prove her worth and fulfill a destiny that has been laid before her. Though she carries the weight of her father's accomplishments and the expectations placed upon her, Yuna is not just motivated by the desire for recognition. She is driven by a deep sense of responsibility. She believes in the power of summoners to bring peace to Spira, and she sees her journey as a continuation of her father's work. However, as the story unfolds, Yuna's path as a summoner will reveal both the complexities of the pilgrimage and the sacrifices that come with it, as well as her evolving understanding of what it means to truly honor her father's legacy. Lulu serves as a guardian to summoner Ginam, who dies on her pilgrimage. Lulu returns to Besaid. Lulu's objections to Yuna's decision to become a summoner are rooted in both personal trauma and a deep sense of protectiveness. Having been a guardian for Lady Ginam on a failed pilgrimage, Lulu experienced firsthand the heartbreak of losing someone she cared for. Ginam's death, during an attempt to acquire Yojimbo, and the failure of her pilgrimage left Lulu with a profound sense of guilt and a fear that history might repeat itself with Yuna. For Lulu, the idea of Yuna following in her father's footsteps and embarking on a pilgrimage was too painful a prospect, as it meant exposing Yuna to the same dangers and heartbreaking outcomes she had witnessed before. The memory of watching Lady Ginam die during her journey made Lulu more determined to shield Yuna from such a fate. 1 year ago, Lulu becomes a guardian for Summoner Zook. Wakka also promises to become Zook's guardian after the Blitzball tournament. Having failed her last pilgrimage, Lulu joins Summoner Zook as guardian for a second pilgrimage, with her friend Wakka also promising to become guardian once the Blitzball tournament finishes. Sound familiar? The Crusaders carry out a daring defense operation on the Jose shore. Chapu is killed, taking part in the battle as a Crusader. The Crusaders press ahead with the Jose shore defense operation. Chapu's death is a pivotal moment for both Wakka and Lulu, as it leaves behind a deep sense of loss and unresolved emotions. For Wakka, the grief is compounded by feelings of guilt and frustration. He had tried to convince Chapu to carry a sword, an emblem of tradition and honor within the Yevonite worldview, but Chapu had chosen instead to use Machina weaponry. This decision, which Wakka viewed as a rejection of Yevon's teachings, becomes a source of pain for him after his brother's death. The idea that Chapu might have been better protected if he had accepted the sword weighs heavily on Wakka's conscience. For Lulu, Chapu's death is a tragic and complex emotional blow. She's not only grieving the loss of her lover, but it also hammers home the necessity of protecting those she loves from sin, by serving as a guardian for a summoner who might defeat sin. Lulu and Wakka leave on a pilgrimage as Zook's guardians. After Chapu's death, Lulu and Wakka, alongside Zook, embark on their pilgrimage as guardians, each carrying their own emotional baggage. Reflecting on his past actions, Wakka admits that during his first pilgrimage, his mind was often consumed by thoughts of Blitzball, a distraction that ultimately prevented him from fully committing to his responsibilities as a guardian. This realization comes to light during the game's events, where Wakka reflects on his past and acknowledges that he failed to prioritize the pilgrimage's true purpose. His promise to protect Yuna, made more deeply after Chapu's death, leads him to make a life-changing decision. He quits Blitzball after the tournament and resolves to focus entirely on being a guardian. 6 months ago, Zook quits his pilgrimage in the Calm Lands. Lulu and Wakka return to Besaid. After their respective failed pilgrimages, both Lulu and Wakka return to Besaid, their home island. Despite the emotional scars of their past failures, they are determined not to let Yuna face the same fate. Alongside Kimahri Ronzo, who swore to be Yuna's guardian some year or so prior, they pledged themselves to her cause as well. Lulu, despite her painful experiences, steps into the role of guardian for a third time, offering her wisdom and strength to guide Yuna on her journey. Wakka, finally understanding the gravity of his role, pledges to take being a guardian more seriously. Kimahri, though more reserved, silently watches over Yuna, his loyalty to her rooted deeply into the very core of his being. Right before the game begins, Jiskel dies. His son Seymour assumes leadership of the Guado, as well as the position of maester of Yevon. Jiskel Guado's death marks a turning point for the Guado people. While initially regarded as a competent and respected leader, his sudden death takes everyone by surprise. It is later revealed that Seymour, Jiskel's own son, was the one responsible for his father's murder, a move that would secure his position as the new leader of the Guado. With his rise to power, Seymour is also appointed as the maester of the Makalania Temple, further solidifying his influence within the Temple of Yevon. This murder is the first major step in Seymour's larger, more sinister plan. By eliminating his father, Seymour removes any obstacle standing between him and total control over the Guado. His position as a maester provides him with unparalleled access to the inner workings of the temple and its influence over Spira. But more than just a power grab, Seymour's actions signal the beginning of his twisted ambition to become Sin. It's clear now that Seymour is no longer the faithful servant of Yevon that many believe him to be. He is a man consumed by his own ideology, one that seeks to bring about destruction on a massive scale. This also brings us to the point of the beginning of FF10 and the end of PMOG's translated timeline from the FF10 Ultimania Omega guide. However, there is also a supplementary timeline taken from the character profiles in the guide, and we'll go over all of those as well. There were a few points I already touched on in my own elaborations, so I'll leave those bits out. 17 years ago, Lulu's parents are killed by Sin. This point on the timeline clarifies that Lulu is orphaned at the age of 5. This also makes me wonder if Wakka and Chapu's parents were killed in the same attack, given that they all came from Besaid village. 15 years ago, Riku is born to Sid and his wife. I don't know how the official timeline went over all of the other party members in such detail, but passed over the birth of Riku, one of just 2 playable characters in both the original FF10 as well as the sequel. Regardless, Riku is born 15 years ago, and as the daughter of Sid, is obviously first cousin to Yuna, who is daughter to Sid's sister. Unspecified time, Riku's mother is killed by a rampaging Machina. Having so many characters orphaned by Sin, it's a reminder of the dangers all around as Riku's mother is killed by an out-of-control Machina. This kind of makes me think of real-world dangers we take for granted that cause a lot of untimely deaths, such as driving a car. I guess with that in mind, let's all take a step back just to remember to drive safely. 10 years ago, after rescuing Jecht with Brasa and before leaving on the pilgrimage, Auron says his farewells to Keenock. There's not a lot of exposition about Auron's relationship with Keenock, but it is said that they were good friends when they served as warrior monks together. I guess during Auron's time away as an unsent, existing solely to live up to his promises to Brasa and Jecht, his principles became misaligned with Keenock, who appears to have fallen deeply into corruption over the 10 years since Auron's disappearance. During the pilgrimage, Auron promises Brasa to bring Yuna to Besaid. We touched on Auron's promise to Brasa earlier. This colors and makes sense of Kimahri bringing Yuna to Besaid instead. After challenging Yunalesca and before arriving at Bevelle, Auron is taken care of by Rin at the Calmlands travel agency, but disappears before daybreak. I don't think this part is super important, if for any reason, maybe because despite being a warrior monk of Yevon, it shows that Auron doesn't harbor any disdain for the Bhed. 1 year ago, Tidus debuts as a player for the Zanarkand Abes. Despite being such a remarkable blitzball player, the Ultimania's bio on Tidus reveals that he only played for the Zanarkand Abes for a single year. I guess I also imagine that Zanarkand in its heyday might have had multiple blitzball teams, and maybe even youth leagues that would explain his skill, other than just the obvious, Jecht was the best, so his son must be the best. And with that, analyzing PMOG's translation of the FF10 timeline is complete. This turned out to be a pretty long video, and I hope you enjoyed the journey through the histories of Spira. Check out some of my other Final Fantasy videos if you enjoyed this one. They're popping up on screen right now. With all of that out of the way, have fun and stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye-bye!